The first time stepping in her tailoring shop felt like crossing into a different kind of silence, one filled with color, texture, and quiet attention. The sun filtered through the sheer curtains, painting soft streaks of gold across rows of fabric neatly lined against the wall. Every inch of the room seemed carefully arranged, spools of threads sorted by shade, mannequins half-dressed in unfinished designs, and the faint hum of a ceiling fan carrying the scent of warm fabric and lavender starch. She stood near the back, measuring tape around her neck, her glasses slipping down slightly as she looked up. There was something about her, poised yet warm, confident yet kind, that made it hard to hold steady eye contact. Her smile was calm, but knowing, the kind that lingered a second too long, making the air feel heavier. "You're the one who needs the suit, right?" she asked with a light laugh, brushing her fingers against a dark navy fabric. "Your friend said you're not used to this sort of thing." Nodding, words barely formed. Her presence had a strange effect, commanding without trying, patient without effort. When she spoke, it wasn't just her voice that filled the room, it was her ease, her quiet certainty. She gestured toward the raised, fitting platform, the one surrounded by mirrors from every angle. "Stand there," she said softly. "Let's get you measurements." The sound of the measuring tape unrolling was sharper than expected, cutting through the stillness. Her hands moved with practiced precision, gentle, deliberate, always professional. Yet somehow every touch carried a kind of awareness, an electricity just beneath the surface. When the tape brushed across the wrist or the side of the neck or the curve of the shoulder, it wasn't just fabric being measured. It felt like she was reading more than dimensions. "You're tense," she murmured, glancing up briefly. "Relax. If you stay stiff, I'll never get the right numbers." Try to relax only made the heartbeat louder. Her perfume, a mix of vanilla and something deeper, maybe cedarwood, lingered close enough to notice but never overpowered. The quiet sound of her pen scratching numbers onto a small notepad filled the moments between short breaths. When she stepped back finally, her expression softened, eyes tracing the outline of the jacket draped loosely over the shoulders. "You've got good posture," she said, tilting her head slightly. "Most young men don't." There was a pause, just long enough to feel the space between words stretch thin. Then she smiled again, a slow, practiced smile that hinted at amusement. "But I'll still have to make a few adjustments." "Sometimes," she said, gathering the fabric with her fingertips, "the best fit isn't about size, it's about how someone moves inside the fabric." The words lingered longer than they should have. The fitting was supposed to be routine, quick measurements, and small talk. But as she moved to jot down the final numbers, it was clear something had shifted quietly in that small, sunlit room, something that neither of them was ready to name yet. The second visit wasn't planned. It was supposed to be a simple follow-up, just checking if the suit was ready. Yet the moment the bell above the shop door chimed, it felt less like an errand and more like being drawn back into something quietly magnetic. The shop was different this time. A softer light filtered in from the windows, catching motes of dust floating lazily in the air. The scent of freshly pressed linen mixed with a hint of brewed tea. Somewhere in the background, a radio hummed an old romantic tune, faint, slightly distorted, but enough to fill the silence that lived between the racks of unfinished clothes. She looked up from her sewing machine, a pen between her lips, and that same amused glint in her eyes. "You're early," she said, removing the pen and standing up. Or maybe just impatient. There was no real answer for that. She wiped her hands on her apron and motioned toward the fitting area again. "The jacket's almost done. I just need to see how it sits on you." As the jacket slipped onto the shoulders, her fingertips brushed lightly against the collar, smoothing the fabric. She murmured. "It's close, but not perfect yet." She stepped closer, tugging gently at the lapel. "You see, tailoring is about attention. You can't rush it. You have to feel it." The way she said feel it lingered longer than expected. Her tone wasn't suggestive. Not exactly, but the quiet emphasis carried a weight that made the air feel warmer. She adjusted the sleeve, measuring again. The tape brushed against the wrist, then the chest. "Breathe in," she said softly, her voice almost a whisper now. Good. Now out. The closeness was unavoidable. Her presence calm, professional, yet deeply human. Every small movement, every adjustment carried a certain patience that felt almost intimate. It wasn't just about the suit anymore. It was about trust, the unspoken kind that builds when two people exist quietly in the same moment, completely aware of each other without saying much at all. You're improving, she said after a while, smiling faintly. You stand more naturally now. Less nervous. Maybe just used to it, came the quiet response, though the pulse in the throat said otherwise. Her laughter was low and genuine, the kind that softened the air. Good. Because good tailoring only works when someone allows themselves to be seen properly. She looked up then, holding that gaze a moment longer than usual. And you hide more than you think. The words caught off guard. Before a reply could form, she stepped back and began pinning the fabric again, pretending not to notice the sudden silence. Don't worry, she added, almost playfully. We'll get it right. Some things just take more than one fitting. As the needle clicked rhythmically behind her, there was a new kind of tension in the room, one stitched quietly between her words and the spaces where they didn't speak. It wasn't just about measurements anymore. It was about the invisible thread that was starting to pull them closer, inch by careful inch. The third visit came unplanned again. This time, the sun had already slipped behind the rooftops, leaving the street in a soft golden haze that soon surrendered to twilight. The Tailor shop's sign flickered gently in the dim light, its glow cutting through the growing dusk. Inside, the familiar hum of the sewing machine was replaced by the quiet ticking of a wall clock and the faint scent of lavender starch. The door creaked open, and there she was, standing near the counter, her reading glasses perched delicately on her nose. She looked up, half surprised, half amused. You do realize, she said, voice calm and teasing, most fittings happen in daylight, not after hours. I was passing by, came the reply, casual yet uncertain. Thought I'd see if the suit was ready. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she studied for a moment, not just the face, but something beneath it. Then, with a slow smile, she said, Well, you're here now. Let's finish what we started. The shop felt different in the evening, quieter, more personal. The usual background noise of the street had faded, leaving only the low hum of the ceiling fan and the rhythmic sound of fabric shifting under careful hands. When she gestured toward the mirror, her tone carried no formality now. It was softer, familiar. Go on, she said, handing over the jacket. Let's see how my work fits in the dark. As the fabric slid over the shoulders, there was something heavier in the air, not tension exactly, but awareness. Her eyes watched closely, not in judgment, but in quiet study. You've changed, she said, stepping forward. Your posture's different. You're more sure of yourself. Maybe it's the suit, came the half-smile in reply. Or maybe it's the tailor, she returned easily. The words hung there, playful yet edged with something unspoken. She circled around slowly, adjusting a button, smoothing a wrinkle, her fingertips tracing brief, professional touches that still managed to send small ripples of awareness. Perfect fit, she murmured finally, almost to herself. Though perfection always depends on the wearer. The clock ticked louder now, filling the spaces between breaths. She looked up into the mirror, meeting his reflection, eyes locking not through direct sight, but through glass. Do you like what you see? She asked quietly. There was no immediate answer. The reflection said enough. Two figures framed by fading light, bound by silence that said more than words could. Finally, she stepped back, folding her arms loosely. You know, she said after a pause, tailoring isn't just about clothes. It's about learning someone, how they move, how they carry themselves, what they hide under fabric. The shop seemed smaller then, the air heavier, charged with something unnamed. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes this time. You've still got one more fitting, she said softly. Come tomorrow. There's one last thing I need to measure. The words lingered as the door closed behind, leaving the night outside colder, and the mystery of that last measurement echoing louder than the ticking clock ever could. The next evening arrived with an odd mix of nerves and anticipation. The streets were quieter than usual, the air heavy with the smell of rain that hadn't yet fallen. The tailor shop's light glowed softly in the dimness, a small beacon of warmth against the cool night. As the door creaked open, the faint sound of fabric being folded filled the silence. She was there again, not behind the counter this time, but near the mirror, arranging a few rolls of cloth. She turned, her eyes already holding a knowing smile. "I wasn't sure you'd come," she said, voice low and steady, like a song she'd sung before. "I said I would," came the quiet reply. "Well," she murmured, setting down the fabric. "Then let's finish your suit." Her tone carried a strange softness tonight. Not the playful teasing from before, but something slower, deliberate, like she was trying to stretch each second a little longer. The shop felt suspended in time, the dim light reflecting off the mirror, the faint rustle of thread, and the rhythmic ticking of the clock marking moments that neither seemed eager to let pass. "Take off the jacket," she said gently. "I need to recheck the shoulder width." The movement was simple, but the closeness that followed wasn't. She stepped behind, measuring tape brushing lightly across the collarbone, her fingers steady yet careful. The contact was brief, but electric, not bold, just real. "Hold still," she whispered, her breath warm near the ear. "Perfection takes patience." A quiet laugh escaped, breaking the silence just enough to ease the tension, but not enough to erase it. When she moved to the cuffs, her fingertips brushed the skin of his wrist, and for a second she paused, not because she needed to, but because she wanted to. Then, almost reluctantly, she pulled the tape back and said, "You've grown taller, I think. Or maybe you're just standing closer." The faintest smile curved her lips. "Maybe." They shared a brief silence, the kind that feels fuller than words. Then she turned toward the mirror, studying the reflection of the suit on him, her own reflection just beside it. "You know," she began slowly, "people think tailoring is about stitching fabric, but it's really about noticing where someone's shoulders tense, where they relax. Clothes tell the truth when people won't." Her voice softened further, almost to a whisper. "You've been carrying something lately, haven't you?" There was no answer, only the quiet exhale of someone who's been seen too clearly. She didn't press. Instead, she reached up and straightened the collar, fingertips grazing the side of the neck. "Better," she said finally. "Now it fits perfectly." Their eyes met in the mirror, hers calm, his uncertain. "So," she asked, "what do you think?" "It's more than I expected," he replied. She smiled faintly, lowering her gaze. "That's what good tailoring does. It reveals more than it hides." Outside, the first drops of rain began to fall, tapping softly against the window. The sound filled the silence between them, neither moving, neither breaking eye contact, both knowing something deeper had been measured tonight, something no tape could capture. The rain hadn't stopped since that night in the shop. It came and went in gentle bursts, like a rhythm that echoed everything left unspoken between them. Days passed, yet her words, "Clothes tell the truth when people won't," stayed lodged in his mind, quiet but constant. He returned to the shop a few evenings later, under the same gray sky. This time, he didn't come for fitting or fabric. He came because something felt unfinished, a conversation, a moment, maybe even a feeling. The bell above the door rang softly, and there she was again, pinning a dress on a mannequin, her hair loosely tied, strands falling across her face. "You're early," she said without turning. "I didn't set a time." "You didn't need to." She finally looked up, and the look she gave wasn't one of surprise, more like she'd expected him all along. The silence between them was familiar now, full of things that didn't need to be named. He stood near the counter, running a finger along a spool of thread. "You always keep this place so quiet," he said softly. "I like hearing the fabric move," she replied. "It tells me what it needs." He smiled faintly. "And what do people need?" She paused at that, her hand stilling over the mannequin's waist. "Patience," she said finally, "and someone who notices when the stitches start to come undone." Her eyes met his then, and something in the air shifted just slightly, It wasn't attraction that filled the room, not yet. It was recognition. That rare moment when two people realize they've both been quietly holding back for reasons they can't quite explain. She gestured toward a chair near her table. "Sit," she said. "I'm fixing the lining on your jacket. Might as well wait." He did, and as she worked, the small sounds of her world filled the space. Scissors snipping, threads sliding through cloth, rain brushing against glass. Every movement of hers seemed careful, deliberate, as if the act of tailoring was more than work, as if it was her way of staying steady in a world that didn't always hold still for her. Without looking up, she said quietly, "You remind me of my son when he was your age. Always rushing, never staying long enough to see what could happen if he slowed down." He hesitated, unsure how to respond, but she continued, her voice softer now, almost wistful. "That's the thing about youth. You think everything meaningful will announce itself loudly, but most of it just whispers." Her words hung in the air, gentle and grounding all at once. When she finally looked up, their eyes met again, and this time there was no teasing, no pretense. Just honesty, simple and unguarded. She handed him the jacket, now perfectly mended, and said, "There, stronger at the seams now. Just be careful not to pull too hard next time." He slipped it on, feeling the warmth of the fabric. But it wasn't the jacket he noticed. It was her, the quiet care stitched into every thread, the calm in her eyes, the understanding that didn't need to be spoken. For the first time, he realized this wasn't just about a suit anymore. It was about two lives, one still being shaped, and one learning that maybe, just maybe, some connections aren't meant to fade, even when they defy explanation. The next time he walked into the shop, the air felt heavier, not tense but expectant. The curtains were drawn halfway, letting in ribbons of late afternoon sunlight that painted soft gold across the room. The rhythmic hum of the sewing machine had stopped. Everything was still. She looked up from her workbench, her eyes tracing his face for a moment longer than usual. "You came back again," she said, half smiling. "I didn't mean to stay away," he replied quietly. Something flickered in her eyes, surprise, maybe gratitude. She set aside the fabric she'd been cutting and motioned toward the fitting area. "Your jacket still needs one last adjustment," she said. "Come on, it won't take long." He followed, though they both knew this wasn't really about the jacket anymore. The small fitting room was surrounded by mirrors and muted light. She stood close as she pinned the hem, her touch careful, professional, and yet something about the proximity made the air feel charged. He could smell faint traces of her perfume, something floral, subtle, with a warmth that lingered. Her voice was calm, but her tone softer than before. "You hold too much tension in your shoulders," she murmured, gently tugging at the fabric. "Maybe it's because I'm not used to someone fixing my mistakes." She chuckled lightly, her hand resting just above his shoulder for a heartbeat longer than necessary. "We all need someone to, sometimes." The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was delicate, like both of them were balancing on the edge of something unspoken. Then, without looking up, she said, "You remind me how it feels to start over." I'd forgotten what that was like. Her words caught him off guard. "Start over." She finally looked up, meeting his gaze through the mirror. "Yes, to feel seen again, not as someone's mother or someone's worker, but just me." The way she said it, almost in a whisper, carried a weight years deep. It wasn't flirtation, it was confession. And in that moment, he understood that her strength wasn't just in her hands or her craft, but in the quiet courage it took to admit loneliness. He turned slightly to face her. "You deserve that," he said softly. "To be seen." Her eyes softened, but she quickly looked away, pretending to fix a sleeve that didn't need fixing. "Careful," she murmured with a half-smile. Words like that can unravel a person faster than bad stitching. But the tremor in her voice betrayed her calm exterior. Their hands brushed as she reached for a pin. It wasn't deliberate, but neither of them pulled away. For a brief, breathless second, time seemed to hold still. Only the faint ticking of the clock reminded them that the world still existed outside that room. Then she stepped back, clearing her throat. "There," she said quietly. Perfect fit. He exhaled slowly, the air feeling heavier than when he'd walked in. Thank you, he said, his tone steady but his heartbeat anything but. She smiled soft, knowing a little sad. Don't thank me yet. Clothes can lie. Feelings can't. He didn't answer. He just met her eyes once more in the mirror. Two reflections, standing too close, pretending to talk about fabric when what they were really measuring was how much longer they could keep pretending. The morning of the last fitting arrived, wrapped in quiet tension. That kind of stillness that feels heavy with meaning but impossible to name. He'd told himself it was just another visit to collect the finished outfit. Yet his heartbeat betrayed him the moment he stood outside her shop again. The familiar sound of scissors snipping, the scent of freshly pressed fabric, and the faint melody of the radio filled the air. It all felt too ordinary for something that had changed him so deeply. When she looked up and saw him, her smile was softer this time. Not playful, not teasing, just real. You're early, she said, brushing a strand of hair from her face. I couldn't wait, he admitted before catching himself. But she didn't react, at least not outwardly. She simply nodded and motioned toward the fitting area. Then let's see how well it fits. The jacket rested on the hanger like something sacred, every seam stitched with care. As he slipped it on, her hands adjusted the collar, smoothing it over his shoulders. The touch was gentle, deliberate, the same way it had always been, but now it carried something heavier, an awareness that this was likely the last time. You've done more than just make clothes, he said quietly. You've made something that feels alive. She paused, her eyes lifting to his, searching. You talk like an artist, she replied softly. Not many people do. Their gazes held for a long, quiet moment, neither daring to move. Outside, the world went on. Cars passed, the afternoon light shifted, but inside that little shop, time seemed to fold in on itself. Then she exhaled. You should go soon, she said, though her voice trembled slightly. The festival starts in an hour, doesn't it? He nodded. You'll be there. I don't think so, she said after a pause. It's better if I'm not. Why? He asked, even though he already knew. Because people talk, she answered simply. And I've already had enough stories written about me by people who don't know me. He hesitated, taking a step closer. Let them talk. You've done nothing wrong. She smiled, small, sad, beautiful. That's the thing about small towns, she said. Right and wrong don't matter as much as whispers do. He didn't know what to say. So instead, he just stood there, close enough to see the faint lines near her eyes, the quiet strength in her posture, the warmth that had somehow become home to him. Finally, she reached up, fixing the last button on his jacket. Her fingers lingered there, brushing lightly against his chest. Perfect fit, she murmured. He swallowed hard. Then why does it feel like something's missing? She met his gaze one last time, eyes shimmering with a mix of pride and restraint. Because some things, she whispered, aren't meant to be stitched. They're meant to be felt and remembered. Then she stepped back, giving him space to leave. As he turned toward the door, the bell above it chimed softly, a sound that somehow felt like both an ending and a beginning. He looked back once more, and she was already at her workbench, pretending to sew, her expression unreadable. Outside, the world was bright and alive, but a part of him remained in that little tailor shop, with her in the quiet space between what was said and what was almost said. The jacket fit perfectly, but it was her absence that he would wear longest.